Well, everybody, as Jack said, welcome to part two of the Paterson Museum's 100 Artifacts for 100 Years Anniversary Exhibit Presentation Series. We are going to talk today about numbers 21 through 40. And as Jack indicated, number 21 is one of my favorite artifacts in the museum's collection. It makes me really, really happy to be able to start the presentation with this particular artifact. This ticket, which was used at the Paterson Show, which was a movie theater or Nickelodeon in Paterson, came to the museum's collection in 2024, courtesy of the Paterson Museum Foundation, who found it and purchased it for us on auction. The Paterson Show was a movie theater, as I said, which was located at 136 Market Street. And here we can see it circled in blue from a 1915 city atlas. What makes this ticket particularly significant is that the Paterson Show was the defendant in a groundbreaking civil rights case that took place here in Paterson in 1911. On September 22nd, 1911, an African-American woman named Minerva Miller and two of her family members attempted to buy 5-cent Nickelodeon tickets to go see the movie, but they were denied entry and told that admission for African Americans was 25 cents each. Minerva Miller decided to sue, and she actually won, which her case would then set a precedent for civil rights cases in the state of New Jersey. Now, if you're interested in knowing more about Minerva Miller, I did a whole presentation just on her, and that's available on the museum's YouTube channel. Unfortunately, there are no known photos of Mrs. Minerva Miller. And so to me, at least, having this theater ticket, although, we don't know what date it was issued and to whom it was issued, does sort of help provide something tangible for Minerva Miller's story. Right. And number 22 is our V for Victory banner.
Okay, this is this is an object that recently came to the museum. We're not 100% sure about its origins, but we can only speculate based on its era for the war worker. This is World War II. And with the quiet please, we imagine this would have been a banner that would have been hanging outside someone's home to remind the neighborhood kids that, a war worker was there. During World War II, many Pattersonians were engaged in, producing items for the war effort, and that would include 3 shifts. So you would have 24 hours of working in the city. One of the main occupations, of course, was working at the Wright's Aeronautical Corporation. From 1940 to 1945, Wrights would see their numbers double. They went from 10,000 to 20,000 employees during the war years. So again, this was our number one employer, and they were manufacturing engines primarily for the B-17, B-25, and later the B-29 bomber program, which helped us win World War II and defeat the Axis powers. And some of the images, and again, a lot of the times the men who were trained to work on these machines would often get drafted, and they would be replaced by either their wives, sisters, or moms, depending on who was available. Some of them even left their jobs, whether they worked in the silk industry, say they worked in a pastry, a coat factory. They all felt compelled to work in the war effort, and depending on what shift they may have had, if they were working the evening shifts, it would be real appreciative if the neighborhood kept it a little quiet as you walk past their home. California quail. This is one of the first items that I actually touched here back in 1989 when I became the director. When I was moving some of the items around, I kind of fell in love with this little bird. Sort of reminded me of like Benjamin Franklin. And we really didn't have much use for him, but he really is probably one of the older items. The very first exhibits that the museum put on 100 years ago was courtesy of Thomas Hallahan, who was an electrical engineer on the Panama Canal, and he did a lot of taxidermy. And that was really part of the nucleus of our collections was natural history. Here's a view of the old Paterson Museum. We're located at 268 Summer Street, and you can see there's plenty of taxidermy inside there. We try to look inside some of those cabinets. I know my little Ben Franklin's got to be in there somewhere, but regardless, he's been in my office or near me for, well, again, I got to point to the 1989. You do the math. And we're really proud of this bird, and we do have other ones, but whether they see light of day for public exhibition, hard to say. It took this 100th anniversary for me to let go of him out of my office to put him on display for you to all enjoy as well.
So number 24 is Dean McNulty's Kneeler. Now, Paterson's history is full of larger than life characters, and I think it's pretty fair to say that Dean McNulty is one of the largest. He's definitely one of those individuals. Reverend William McNulty was born in Ireland, and he came to serve in Paterson in the Catholic Church in October of 1863. During his tenure, in just the first 2 decades, the size of the Catholic presence in Paterson had greatly increased, growing from 1 to 5 congregations. Under his leadership, work began on the church located on Grand Street that became St. John the Baptist Cathedral. The church was completed in part due to the free labor provided by members of the congregation on weekends. When he was building the cathedral, McNulty insisted repeatedly on the inclusion of the bishop's seat, which is an honor that was usually reserved for cathedrals. And when the church was being built, there was no plan for it to be a cathedral. But he kind of sort of had this vision for his church to become a cathedral, and his vision sort of came to become a reality in 1937 when the Diocese of Paterson was formed, and at that time the church officially became a cathedral. And there was the bishop's seat already for them. What you see on the other image you see on the screen is the statue of Dean McNulty, which was created by Paterson sculptor Gaetano Federici and stands right outside the cathedral today. Now, there's so many stories about Dean McNulty, and they're all very, very interesting. One of them that we came across in one of the Paterson newspapers was that he would go around to all of the saloons and drinking establishments in Paterson on payday, and he would sort of encourage to the level of possibly intimidate some of his congregation members to try and convince them to go home and not spend their money on drink, but to go home to their families instead. Now, at one time, Paterson had what was called a bishop's law, which said that saloons needed to close on Sundays and stay closed, and if they opened on a Sunday, they'd be fined. And on one occasion, a different article indicated that Dean McNulty found out that there was a saloon open on a Sunday, and he went and confronted the saloon owner and ended up in a fist fight with the gentleman because of being open on a Sunday. So these stories, I think, demonstrate what I mean about his strong personality, and that he led with a firm hand, sometimes clenched in a fist, it would seem. So.
Okay. Paterson's always been a home of innovation and invention, and there's quite a few Pattersonians that maintain, patents. One of our stars, especially for the locomotive industry, was a Samuel H. Dunning. This is a patent model for a stopcock for air brake system, basically a valve to regulate airflow for the braking system on a locomotive. Actually, his job originally when he was hired by the Rogers Locomotive Works, and he was sort of known as a traveling engineer. And he was part of the Locomotive Express. After locomotives were built in Paterson and they had to find their way across the country, often he was accompanying the locomotive and getting it to its destination and the main line that it would be part of. His very first patent that he would apply for was back in 1885 for an exhaust mechanism. He also worked 1899. He was awarded another one for compound locomotives. And there's an article in 1935 at the age of 79, he was still working on another exhaust mechanism that was going to make locomotives run cleaner, be more fuel efficient. So, his inventive genius never stopped. And just another credit to, Paterson's title of, again, the city of innovation and invention. The lease from Rogers, Ketchum, and Grosvenor. That's where the Paterson Museum's located. This was the original company that was formed in 1832. And this is one of the lease agreements that they had formed with the Society for Establishing Useful Manufacturers. This particular one is dated from November of 1852. Rogers, as you may recall, was the largest locomotive manufacturer in Paterson. And I'm not really an autograph collector, but when I was going through the collections and I saw this, I was actually, got to be honest, I was like, what a wonderful find. As you see the signatures here, we have Thomas Rogers, Morris Ketchum, and Jasper Grosvenor. It's the only document that I know, and it's also signed by order of Roswell Colt. These are some of like the greatest people in the city's history, all on one document. And actually, this is just one part of, we have thousands of documents from the SUM. I think it fills 2 filing cabinets, 4 drawers of documents which cover leases, deeds, and correspondence, and including, which was previously talked about, we have the Board of Directors minutes, which goes all the way back to 1792 when the city was founded with Alexander Hamilton in attendance. There's Rogers. In case you're wondering, Thomas Rogers was a direct descendant of Thomas Rogers from the 1620 Mayflower, although that fellow didn't survive the first winter. The building inside that you see is their later erecting shop. Where the museum's located, we're in the former assembly shop that was operating from 1873 to about 1903. Then later they would build a larger one across the street, which is pretty much the entire footprint of where Burger King is now. The entire parking lot, if you were to butt it up against the which says Paterson Silk Machinery Exchange, which is now the home of North Jersey New Jersey Community Development Corporation, and the Ivanhoe, that would be how massive the last erecting shop where you can see the locomotives were built.
So we selected this glass plate negative as an example of sort of our larger glass plate negative collection. And some of you attending this program will know that I have actually presented two separate programs about the museum's glass plate negative collection. So I'm going to keep my remarks about our collection very brief because I get very excited about this collection and there's a lot that can be said. If it sparks your interest, anything that I'm saying, please visit our YouTube channel and you can kind of dive deeper and watch those videos where I talk about and show some of the other examples from the collection. In 2021, the Paterson Museum, in partnership with the Paterson Museum Foundation, decided that we needed to focus our attention on our glass plate negative collection. The museum holds approximately 250,000 photographs and negatives. I think that might actually be a low estimate, to be honest, of which the glass plates comprise about 8,000. And the foundation received grant funds to professionally scan the negatives and rehouse them in a more archivally appropriate materials. Now, a glass plate negative is exactly what it sounds like. It is a photographic negative where the emulsion is adhered to a thin piece of clear glass. The first glass plate negatives, which were known as wet negatives, were developed in 1851. However, they had a very limited use because of the wetness of them. In 1871, silver gelatin coated or dry plates were invented, and those are what we have here in the collection. They had the advantages to using glass plate negatives is that they had a significantly sharper image quality than previous photo negative options. And they were very versatile, although you wouldn't think it traveling around with glass, but considering other photography of the period, they were very versatile. So photographers were no longer sort of stuck only in their studios. They could travel and take a lot more photos outside and away from their studio setups. Dry plates were commonly used from the 1880s through the 1920s, but in our collection, we definitely have through the late 1920s and possibly into the 1930s, I think, for some of the pictures that we have. As of August 2023, the glass plate negatives have all been scanned and safely stored in their boxes, and there they are tucked into bed. But really, having done that part of the project, you would think we were all set and all done, but in fact, our work has only really just begun. In order for these photos to be of use to anybody, we need to provide descriptions and, if possible, identification of the places and, in some cases, hopefully the people that are shown. Now, the big problem with that is that glass plate negatives haven't really got a back. So there's really nowhere for the photographer or anybody to have labeled them. A few of them have almost like what looks like white out written in white on them with a date or a location, but it's very, very rare. So that makes the project even harder. But we're going to continue with this ongoing effort to sort of provide more access to these pictures by providing information about them. So that was why we picked this as one of our 100 artifacts. We're very proud of this project and its ongoing effort, and we think that people should know about it.
Okay, going along with the 250,000 prints and negatives, one of my all-time favorite shots is on display right here. They wrote Paterson 1865, the author. This was actually a photograph that was taken by John Reed. It would be on the highest part of the city, the west of the Passaic River. In the background, you could see Garrett Mountain, and I love the lovely slope, the way it used to be, carved out naturally before Route 80 and Route 19, altered its natural rise. This actually would be taken from the future site of the Soldiers Monument for celebrating the soldiers and sailors that participated in the Civil War. The building just off center is the Colt Gun Mill. It was owned by the Patton Arms Manufacturing Company, where Sam Colt was manufacturing his first firearms between 1837 and 1842. But that's another story we'll get to later when we feature one of those pieces in the upcoming lecture. We know the bell tower that's how we can actually help date this photo. The date is somewhere between 1855 and 1862, because in 1862 there was a fire that wiped out the bell tower and it was never rebuilt. Additionally, not only was this the home and the birthplace of Colt Industries in the beginning of, the factory system or assembly line production for firearms, but in the attic floor, if you look closely, you can just notice the skylights cut in. That's also the birthplace of the silk industry. The very first silk machinery was brought to Paterson in 1838 by Christopher Colt, Sam's brother. Although it would take John Ryle about a year later from Macclesfield, England, for the first successful spinning of silk onto bobbins in the nucleus of our silk industry.
This artifact is the first pulpit Bible used by the congregation of the First Presbyterian Church here in Paterson. The congregation was formed in 1813, and they actually began worshiping at the Old Dutch Church, which was the only house of worship in Paterson at that time. Between 1814 and 1819, they built their own church, and the building was later replaced in 1852 by this newer building, which still stands, although it is no longer an active church building. I believe it is being developed into a performance space by NJCDC. The congregation included many prominent Paterson families, which included the Colt family. Here's Roswell Colt on the right, and two New Jersey governors also worshipped there. Philemon Dickerson and John W. Griggs, and Griggs is here pictured on the left. The history of the city's early religious institutions is a key component to deeper understanding of the city's history, and that's why we decided to include this artifact. One thing that people don't always think about, but the early history of the city owes a lot to these churches, because in many cases, these congregations were the keepers of many of those early records. However, it's not just sort of the birth and date and marriage announcements that we're talking about. When you look at the business dealings in the city, the politics within the city, and even sort of the friendships and fraternal organizations and who's spending time and associating with whom, knowing what families were worshiping together can provide additional insight into all of those relationships and how they directly affected the city, both mostly in positive ways, but also sometimes in negative ways. Now, this book is a memorial book which was presented to the Strange family by the Silk Association of America at the passing of Albert Strange in 1886. Albert Strange, who was originally from England, came to the United States and began a silk import business with his brother in around 1838, and they were based in Brooklyn, New York. During the Civil War, the family decided to transition from importing to manufacturing, and they decided that the best place to locate that new arm of their enterprise was here in Paterson, New Jersey. So in 1868, the William Strange and Company was formed, which the daily operations were managed by Albert's son William, and the company was in his name. Here's an interior view of the book, and it's all hand done. It's such an intricate and beautiful artifact that we have, and so we chose this artifact for a couple of different reasons. For one, it demonstrates the power and the importance of the Paterson silk industry in the larger national context. William Strange himself served as president of the Silk Association of America for many years, as did many other Paterson mill owners. Beyond their national importance, the book also helps us connect with the individuals whose companies formed Paterson and made it a great industrial city. When people visit the museum and look at the textile machinery, we also need to be thinking about the individuals who are standing by those machines working them, as well as the businessmen and visionaries who laid the groundwork to make all of this possible. They're not just sort of names and footnotes, but they were people too. And I think that artifacts like this make it easier for us to connect with them. The Williams Strange and Company mill is still standing in Paterson. When the company first came here in 1868, when they first formed, they actually just rented space. But in 1874, they developed their own mill, which is contained within a block of Madison Street, Morton Street, Beach Street, and Essex Street, which I tried to circle in red on the map. In 1890, the company had about 800 employees.
Okay, the silk thread glass tapers or the glass candlesticks. These came to our collections in 2008, and I was really excited about them when they got here because at first I figured there was just somebody who worked in the silk mills of Patterson and came up with some idea to, how to make, a folk art example using the silk threads as the filler for these glass candles. Unfortunately, that turned out not to be the case as Heather did a little more research as our curator and diligently found that they actually were probably produced sometime in the 1920s or 30s because we were able to find a very similar set available for auction. So these may not have been very mass produced, but they were definitely not just made by some silk worker in Paterson, but they could possibly be filled with silk from Paterson.
Yeah. And I think they're very pretty. I like the sort of tie-dyed effect they have in the center. It's very interesting.
And thank you for the candle holders that hold them up.
Yeah, I want them back when the exhibit's done. So Paterson postcards, besides having a very large number of photographs and negatives in our collection, we also have a huge collection of postcards. And so today, many people say that letter writing is a dying art. And I think in some ways that makes these artifacts, these postcards, particularly interesting. We have over 350 different postcard views in our collection. In many cases, we have more than one copy of the same view. And in some cases, those within that 350, the difference in view is not very great. Sometimes one is a black and white and the next is colorized and it's the same photograph. In some cases, the font color is different. But we have a very large collection with great variety. For many of us, the focus and importance of the card is the image on the front. However, these postcards are more than just a way to say, wish you were here. And for us today as curators to sort of, and museum professionals to sort of fill the wall with aesthetically pleasing historic images. Postcards are artifacts that represent a cultural phenomenon that may reveal so much more about the people who created them, purchased them, and wrote them. Not only their front views and their messages, but also a postcard's stamps, postmarks, and even their address has a story to tell about the past. The first postcard in America was patented in 1861. Now they're known, depending on the time period, as postcards, all one word like we would see it today, postal cards with an AL, or postcards were the two separate words. And they quickly became a popular way to send a quick message. The name, style, and material on which they were printed, and whether they had borders or other features on the back, features like glitter, or the front, as well as helped to pinpoint the different dates of production and the companies that produce them. Now, we're actually in the midst of working on developing a virtual exhibit that we would like to share many of our postcards with the public, and that's how we know how many we have. I think 158 are the goal for what we're going to show on display. So please stay tuned for that. In the near future, we hope to have that available for people to look through at their leisure at home.
Before you finish on that, I wanted to add, forget the art of letter writing. It's the art of letter reading.
Yes. Yes.
We found out what our superpower is as defined by the Library of Congress, reading cursive.
Yes.
It's really a lost art. Some of our college interns are really lost. So it's one of our superpowers, although I got to be honest, with reading names, it seems like everyone could write their first name very clearly. The last name, it's
Yeah.
like trying to figure out and forget the letters. So sometimes we get it just with context, but one
Yeah.
of our superpowers, especially everyone, who's listening here, I'm pretty sure has that one down pat.
I also find it interesting when you look at the cancellations, and they used to do a cancellation stamp for when they received it in the post office, and where they, when they received it in the city or town of the person it was sent to. And it's interesting to see how quickly the mail moved, and the fact that there was day and night, drop offs and things like that. It's very different than it is today.
Patterson's most famous school teacher is John Philip Holland, the inventor of the modern submarine. So I think having sketchbooks and notebooks from a teacher are really ideal, let alone this is really the very beginnings of the development of his submarines. Probably need an engineering student one day to go through these. We have several of these, and this is really talk about the tip of the iceberg. From correspondence, diagrams, drawing, there's probably over 10,000 original documents relating the development of the submarine from the early 1870s to early 1900s.
Yeah, and in some ways they're a bit of a nightmare, because this one you kind of can't tell the scale, but this is sort of almost like a journal or a reporter's notebook. So they're thin and small and not necessarily all staying together. Um,
And he had a tendency to write on edges. We have some other, you could see
yeah.
as his mind was thinking, he'd squeeze things in. And
Yep.
here's John later in life. And of course, popping out of his sixth submarine. He would develop 6 submarines while living in the United States. First part was in Paterson, then later in Newark. And it's his sixth submarine that the United States Navy commissions on October 12th, the USS Holland, and the very first submarine in our submarine fleet for the Navy. Okay. One of the exhibits that we have in the museum was brought to us by former pharmacist Frank Pinchek, and it was really based on patent medicines. This was supposed to be an exhibit that was only going to be up for 3 months back in 1996, and the exhibition is still on loan from not from Frank and Edith Pinchek, since they unfortunately they've passed, but they did make it to their 90s. But their children have this on loan. But in the meantime, we started collecting items that Frank would acquire for us, and one of the more unusual books he gave us, and this thing is huge. It's at least 7 inches thick. And this is the way prescriptions would be archived. Today, now you may scan it if you even have a scanner. Sometimes they just type everything in from the doctor's office, and it goes to the computer at the pharmacist, and that's how they, record medicines that are prescribed to patients. In the old days, what they would do is they would just paste them into this book and bang, that's how they kept them. Very brittle, but it lists the doctors, and you could actually read their handwriting at the time.
Yeah, and you can't see, it's so great in this picture, but each one is stamped with the date that the pharmacy received it. So there's like a little purple stamp that says, June 7th. I think this page is 1916, something
Hmm.
like that. Yeah. These butterflies, like the quail that Jack refers to as Benjamin Franklin, um, are a reference to the museum's early history, and that's why we chose to include them as well. The museum was founded, as we all know, that's why we're here, in 1925 uh, by the Paterson Free Public Library. But the motivation behind the formation of the museum committee was actually a series of earlier exhibitions hosted at the library. The library we know today as the main branch, or the Danforth Memorial Public Library, opened in 1905. As soon as it opened, exhibits became an integral part of the library's programming. To ensure the quality of the exhibits, in 1916, the library board approved a motion to create a special committee on art exhibits and lectures. These exhibits were used on display in the library's assembly rooms located on the second floor. In 1918, the library was displaying the natural history collection of Thomas Hallinan. Is that how you say his name, Jack? You
Yeah,
mentioned
hell, yeah.
which is pictured here. The exhibit drew thousands of visitors and the library board minutes indicate they began to talk about the idea that we should have a city museum, and this should be a bit more permanent. In 1920, the board purchased the Hallinan collections, and we think that's probably where the butterflies on display today come from. The focus on natural history remained with the museum for several decades, as you saw in the picture that we showed when we showed the quail, before we redefined our mission to concentrate on the history of the city of Paterson specifically.
I remember actually this was the son of Charles Danforth. The Charles Danforth Memorial Library is named after the industrialist who was a textile and locomotive manufacturer, actually right across the street from the Paterson Museum. Captain Charles Danford Jr. Was a member of the 2nd Regiment Company I, and actually we have him referenced in several letters by a James Flavel, who served in his company, also from Paterson. His father was Wright Flavel, who was a baker. The Foot Locker would carry the personal possessions of Captain Charles Danford. Unfortunately, he didn't survive the war. He was killed at Gaines Mill, rather, Virginia, on June 27th, 1862. He was laid to rest at the family plot at Cedar Lawn Cemetery. He was one of, I think there's 212 men from Paterson that perished during the Great War.
So number 37, I was a really big advocate for including these tiny pieces of pottery among our 100 artifacts. I did that because I felt that these are an important part of our collection that most people don't even really notice as they walk through the museum. They've been in the display cases since I've been here. And often if I don't point them out to people on tour, they don't notice them. One of the important things we like to point out to visitors regarding the Lenape artifacts that we have here in our exhibit dedicated to the Lenape is that the Lenape used organic material for their tools and their clothes. And so over time, many of these organic materials like bone, wood, leather, plant fiber, they've disappeared in the historical record. And in most cases, there's a few instances where they haven't. So as a result, the biggest classification of historic artifacts related to the Lenape that we have in our collection are all stone tools. But solely because of the nature of their material, they were allowed to remain within, the archaeological record because they're already sort of rocks. There was nothing to decompose. A bit more rare of a find are these ceramics, especially as the glaze that was sometimes used on earlier pottery is different from the glaze that we see much later on in industrially produced pottery. By including these 4 pieces as a part of the 100 artifacts, I just hope that more people will stop and really look at these beautiful artifacts, and you can see them really well, I think, on your screen in a way that you maybe can't appreciate in person. The designs that have been put in them, and you sort of can kind of connect a little bit better with these people who lived here hundreds of years ago, and were making these designs, the artists and artisans who were developing them approximately 3,000 years ago.
Part of the Lenape collection that we have, the mortar and pestle. This is actually the mortar part was carved from the basalt that makes up our area, which is one of the hardest known rocks. Igneous rock formed in fire, and it was carved into this bowl shape where you would have a pestle, as you can see, the stone pestle, and it would be used for grounding corn into maize for making flour and items such as that. What could you add to that, Heather?
No, you did a great job. It's a perfect example. This is an example of a significantly larger stone tool than most of the tools that we have in our collection. A lot of what we have are sort of, I don't want to say that they'd fit in your pocket necessarily, but I wouldn't want to have to walk very far with this mortar and pestle. It's a very heavy piece. It's a very beautiful piece. It's a really nice example. We actually have it right now in the model wigwam that we have on display.
And this is our pairing of it. That pestle does not necessarily was originally to that one.
Yeah.
We combined 2 artifacts to show how they would work together. Now I'm up. This is a radio alarm router. Probably the oldest piece of machinery in Paterson that was manufactured here by John Royal and Sons. Basically, what a router is, it's a carving device. This was used in the photo engraving or engraving industry. Here you see it in the interior of the Old Manhattan Engraving Company in New York City. Actually, the last person to operate it, we know from the last 25 years of while it was running there, was Doc Madison. When they found out the company, they wanted it back, and they offered to give them a new one if they would give them their old one back. Which again, this was built by the founder John Royal. John Royal himself was an apprentice and started right here at the Rogers Locomotive Works. That's where he learned his, machine trade. He started in the basement of his home back in 1885, and one of his earliest buildings he would build here, you see on the corner of Essex and Straight Street. So this was diagonally across from, a block or so over from the William Strange Mill. So you get an idea where the manufacturing starting to move further away from the river. Actually, I just want to mention that all the initial mills of Paterson from 1794 to 1859 were all powered by the raceway system. It's 1859 and 60 that you start seeing steam, and then later with electric, they started moving further into the interior. They can move a little further away from the Passaic River. This factory, unfortunately, no longer stands. Right now, it's actually an empty parking lot that stands across the street from the post office. As for the artifact itself, it was donated by Royal Systems. As I mentioned, they started in 1855. They're no longer in Paterson. They had moved out in the 1970s. No longer royal family members directly running it, but they it still runs as Royal Systems. And with their number one product was extruding machinery, where they make tubing machinery. They also made quite a bit for textiles. They were part of the jacquard carding industry. I did want to add that the before this piece was on the museum's floor, actually from 1943 to I think 1968 at the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry, they had the Royal Router online for early American machinery.
That's cool.
A lot of the machinery that we have in our collections, actually, Heather can talk better about this. This is his son Vernon Royal, not only industrial but an avid photographer who documented not only the city out all the way through the New York countryside, but thousands of pieces of machinery. Heather?
Yeah, no, so this is an example of one of our glass plate negatives. We have a very large collection within the collection that were Vernon Royal's photographs of the machines from John Royal and Son, from all different sort of perspectives, to sort of large product views to very close up views. And a few of them occasionally have Vernon rather holding a sheet or off to the side, clearly thinking he's not going to be in the picture when they do the final cut. And from what we can tell, we believe these were what were going to be used for the catalog for the company, so that they could sell their product and share those images with potential clients. So that's another sort of big portion of the collection that we have to sort of figure out. We know of some of those catalogs, but sort of matching sort of description with catalog to picture is going to be kind of interesting. And in some, hopefully in most cases, the detailed images are with an image of the larger, because if it's just a detail alone, heaven help us, we'll never figure out what it goes to. But as Jack mentioned, they did a lot. John Royal and Sons did a lot with carding, and this is clearly a carding machine. So
This is a jacquard lacer. We have a earlier example of this machine on display.
okay, this slide. So we got to number 40 very quickly. So this slide has been a crowd pleaser since it arrived at the museum in 2023. It's a wooden slide that was used at school number 10 in Paterson for 101 years. Originally used outside, at some point it was moved inside the kindergarten or first grade classroom and used there for many years. And many of our visitors react and kind of remember it and ask if it's this slide from school 10. Apparently, at one point, at least one of the teachers would use it as a reward. If you had a good day in school and class, before you got to go home, you could go down the slide once. So that's kind of fun. And it might seem in some ways an odd choice for us. If you're familiar with the museum, we have a very industrial sort of tendency. So why would we take this slide? It does have a Paterson connection, but the other problem with it is it's a humongous artifact. It's very large, very difficult to store. And we at the museum, like many museums around the world, continually struggle with storage space for our vast collections. However, we both jumped at the idea of having this slide when the school district reached out and asked us if we were interested. And that's because our museum collections are very industrially focused. They are very product focused. And we don't have particularly very many three-dimensional artifacts that focus on something that isn't work, industry, and products and production. So this was a wonderful opportunity for us to highlight play and sort of look at a different demographic of the citizens of Paterson, the children of Paterson, the school children of Paterson, and be able to kind of reflect on their experience and the experience of being a child growing up in Paterson. So this photo, well, that's not the slide, is another slide of a similar design that was, and this photo is from our glass plate negative collection. So it's kind of goes full circle. I just love this picture. The kids look so cute. And so, I don't know, cold. But they're very bundled up. I wonder what the time of year it was. So.
Come on, you didn't tell them the best part of working at the museum is, we get to cross the line. I'll be the first to admit, I went down the slide the first time in jeans and you best barely fit. The second time I went down and wore something slippery, well, you got to put your feet down before you hit the concrete floor. That's all I gotta say.
I have not tried to go down the slide. I looked at the sign that said, please do not climb, and I did not climb.
Well, that sign came afterwards.
All right, well, with that, we have concluded this portion of our program. We will be presenting again for part 3. We're going to give ourselves the summer off. September 9th, we are going to be presenting part 3 of the artifacts, and we're going to focus on artifacts numbers 41 through 60. So we do please encourage you to write that down on your calendar. We will be, of course, sending out an email reminder for people to register, so don't freak out if you haven't signed up for it yet. We're going to be sending out reminders, and we're very much looking forward to having people join us. All right. Well, it doesn't look like anybody has any questions about our artifacts 21 through 40. So we hope you enjoyed this and this quick sort of dive into a little bit deeper into the artifacts and our purposes for adding them. And we look very much forward to speaking to you again in September. The next programs are scheduled for September. Then we will present again in November, and part 5 will be next February, when we are officially almost or basically through our 100th year, and we'll be in year 101. So look forward to seeing you again then. And if you happen to have tuned into this one but missed part 1 and are saying, well, what were the first 20 artifacts, that's available on the museum's YouTube channel as well. All right.
Thank you, Heather. That was wonderful. I appreciate you. She's the genius behind running all of this and putting this together. So kudos to you. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us. And we appreciate the repeat business. Tell your friends and we'll get the word out to them. Have an enjoyable and safe summer.
Thank you.